So how many of you understand what a person is saying when they speak about General Motors? Well, this topic is important to me because as soon-to-be graduate, I will be hopefully starting my employment at General Motors, and it's always important to know a company before you begin employment there, so that way you seem more enthusiastic about this company and you're able to work your way up in management, which is something I hope to do. This topic is also important with the time period that we are in right now. Many students are out on their own and getting new cars, and with their new refund checks, they're able to buy cars. So know more about a company and where it came from is able to help you understand its history and possibly love a company as much as I do to buy a car. Well, General Motors began on September 16th in 1908 when the Buick Motor Company head William Durant decided to spend $2,000 and incorporate it in General Motors. But the funny thing is that he actually hated car sales. He got most of his money from actually doing horse-drawn buggies. But he never knew that the dangerous risk that he would be taking would end up leading into America's auto industry for one of the top decades. General Motors actually has led being a leading auto manufacturer for 77 years, longer than any other company. During this time in the early 1900s, Durant saw that the economic downturn was an opportunity for making this company. He bought smaller cars as well, and it built into auto accessories, which would soon become the General Motors plants that we know today that are all over the world. We also have one located just in Ohio, Lordstown, Ohio, where I have a grandfather retirement, a brother that works there, and my dad also works there, and they were able to offer me insight. My grandfather was actually there when General Motors became one of the leading companies to employ people. They also now employ 212,000 employees per year, and they do business in more than 120 countries. Wow. Durant was actually a very shrewd businessman, and because of his ambitions and lack of intelligence, it was one of the reasons why he was kicked out as presidency in 1911, but he was able to screw his way back in there by investing so much stock in Chevrolet, and since Chevrolet is a partner to General Motors, he became back in the top. But because that was not a bad thing, because of the financial upswing in the 20s would lead into more innovation for the company. But in the first years of the 20th century, the industry was a complete mess. There were about 45 different car companies that were working throughout the world, and most of them only sold a handful of cars. And usually when you bought those cars, you didn't even get them. They would take your money before the car was finished, and then you would never see them again.
Oh, wow.
So GM was one of the companies that actually was trustworthy enough to actually give you what you wanted for your money. And in 1918, GM acquired the Chevrolet stock from McLaughlin Motor Company, which is the company that Durant was able to get his way back in. And through this acquirement, we were able to gain complete access over the company again. And in 1925, GM began to work its way in other countries in England, and then in 1929, we acquired 80% of stock in the German car industry. We also, 2 years later, were increased to 100% sales, and in 1931, GM acquired Holden of Australia. Oh, so we are currently doing business in more than 37 countries.
Wow.
While Ford continued to refine their manufacturing, Ford, as you know, is a competitor to General Motors. Its process was to reduce costs. However, our new president, Sloan, was inventing new ways of managing a worldwide complex organization to be surpassing Ford. While paying special attention to the customer demands and adapting to the society, he was able to find the cheapest models but make them best for the customers. And he wanted to make sure that we had the style, power, and prestige that GM was able to offer. Sloan did not neglect cost, however, and by any means when it was proposed, Chevrolet should introduce safety glass, which is one of the reasons why GM is known to be one of the safest car vehicles, which we'll see later was not the best throughout the 21st century. And you can see that thanks for the consumer financing that GMAC, which was founded in 1919, we are now able to have easy monthly payments, which we are currently still enacting now. And you can see that Ford did not offer these similar credible ranges, which made GM surpassing Ford and in the late 20s, but because Ford's credit did not exist until 1959. And then in the late 1920s, GM finally surpassed Ford Motor Company in leading auto manufacturing. In 1935, the United Auto Workers Labor Union was formed, which is something that we still have today, which all three of my family members were a part of. And you can see that we have, for my visual aid, we have a coat that my father had received from the union. And then we also have, my father will receive monthly calendars as well as newspapers from General Motors. And we also have little knickknacks here and there. There's a notebook with GM's logo on it and keychains with the Chevrolet Cruze on it. So with this, you can see that GM has gone through many struggles and challenges to be where it's at in today. And you can see that General Motors has produced the vast qualities of arrangements with vehicles, and which soon led into aircraft. We were one of the main creators in World War II aircraft. And with this, we are able to actually boost our sales with post-war efforts. And Wilson had actually said, who was the GM president at this time, and he also was named Secretary of Defense to Theodore Roosevelt, a special quote that said that what's good for General Motors is good for the country. And at this time, after post-war, GM was one of the largest employers in the world, and the only other company to pass it was the Soviet State Industries, which employed more people. But in 1955, General Motors became the first American corporation to pay taxes of over $1 billion. And that's in the 1955 to what $1 billion is to today.
Wow.
And it also in 1955, GM became the first American company to earn more than $1 billion in a single year. And we then are able to go into the 60s and 70s, which was a time of new challenges and great change. We also see that there was a lot of environmental concerns and initiatives at this time, were the ideas of electric vehicles, hybrid electric vehicles, battery packs, flexible fuel vehicles, and a hydrogen initiative, which had also increased prices, and then the foreign competition led to an unprecedented downsizing of vehicles across all GM vehicle lines. It was the largest re-engineering program ever undertaken in the industry, ushering in an age of lighter, aerodynamic, and more fuel-efficient vehicles.
Yeah.
In the 70s, GM pioneered the use of engines that could run on low-heated, unleaded gasoline. And then, while this was happening, GM maintained its world leadership in revenue and market share throughout the 60s to the 80s. We also were able to see that there was also, with positives, there's also negatives that usually follow that give you opportunity for growth. One of the fiascos that occurred during this time was the Chevrolet Convoy in the 60s, and because of its quirky handling, it earned a reputation for being unsafe. Although with the advancements of our society and our world, we were able to improve that, but because of its reputation, Ralph Nader wrote his book, Unsafe at Any Speed, based on our unsafe vehicle. However, we also had to compete with the Ford Mustang at this time, which obviously is still a very beautiful car to this day. Oldsmobile sales also soared in the 70s and 80s for an all-time high of 1,066,122 in 1985, and that was based on their popular design and their positive reviews from critics. Although General Motors was always active internationally, in the 80s and 90s it brought a new urgency to GM to operate a single global company to improve the efficiency of its operation to better compete with global competitors. GM also began a series of reorganizations in North America that led to a single business unit there. In 1982, GM marked its largest single production expansion outside of North America with the opening of the new complex in Spain. In 1955, we also see a big year for GM with the annual vehicle sales outside North America exceeded 3 million units for the first time. 5 million vehicles were sold in the United States that year, and GM entered its first joint venture agreement with China. During this period, GM also formed NUMMI, a joint venture with Toyota and Saturn. By the start of the new millennium, GM had built a strong presence in emerging markets such as China and Brazil. It was also a period of tremendous innovation at GM. The company continued to push ahead with electric vehicle technology, developing a series of hydrogen-powered fuel cell concept demonstration vehicles. Then, in January 2007, GM shocked the industry with the Chevrolet Volt concept, a vehicle that could drive on battery power for daily commuting, which we also see to this day. Notable new models also included the Chevrolet Aveo small car, which is also still on the road to this day. However, in 2008, a major recession and global credit crisis drove car sales to near depression levels and dried up private sources of capital. GM, critically short of operating cash, received a bridge loan from the U.S. Treasury under the conditions that the company further accelerate a tough reconstructing of its U.S. operations that had been underway for several years. General Motors Corporation filed for bankruptcy on June 1, 2009, and a new General Motors company, which acquired many of the strongest assets of the old company, was created then on July 10, 2009, with the U.S. Treasury, Canadian governments, and the UAW Retiree Medical Benefit Trust as its major shareholders. The new GM is smaller, a leaner company than its predecessors. It has 4 brands in the U.S. Chevrolet, Buick, GMC, and the Cadillac. It was a more focused network of 4,500 dealers and a competitive labor agreement with its unions. Globally, GM continues to grow rapidly, and more than 70% of its sales now come from outside the U.S. GM's top 5 markets by sales are now China, the U.S., Brazil, the United Kingdom, and Germany. Re-emerging at the new GM is the competitive spirit that for decades drove GM to its leadership, styling, technology, re-engineering, marketing, and other key areas of the auto business. The spirit guides the new GM as it works to design, build, and sell the world's best vehicles. December 9th, 2013, however, Treasury Secretary Jacob Law announces the government had sold the last of what was previously a 60% stake in GM, ending the bailout. We also see throughout 2013 and 14 was a very big year for GM, where we see that Mary Barra becomes the CEO of GM, and she's the first woman to ever run a major automaker. Wow. Barra learns of the ignition switch defect, which also was a major part of 2014, which we are still going through investigation now with our recalls. In February 25th, 2014, GM added 748,024 more vehicles to its recall. And then March 17th, GM recalls 55 million vans and sport utility vehicles. We also see throughout the years that a deadline for GM to respond to questions on these recalls was on April 3rd. Barra confirms that 2 GM engineers have been put on paid leave as part of the ignition switch investigation. With our present-day society, we are able to see that the path that GM had taken has led us to where we are now. We are still receiving backlash and controversies throughout our media, and you're able to see that with this society today, we are now a philanthropic company. In 1966, the GM Foundation had been exclusively a source for funding for Safe Kids USA, or Save Kids Buckle Up, a program, a national initiative to ensure child automobile safety through education inspection, which is one of the top leading funding for Safe Kids today. And then in 2002, the PACE Awards program, led by GM, EDS, and Sun Microsystems, has given over $1.2 billion of in-kind contributions, which includes computers to over 18 universities to support engineering education. And in 2009, the GM-led group has helped PACE Awards programs worldwide. In 2014, GM gave $51,200,000 in cash contributions and $17,200,000 in in-kind donations to charitable causes. You can see that being a philanthropic organization, raising to your challenges and innovations, that you become a top company that GM has led today. And I hope that this speech has helped you understand that there is every competition or every company that goes through its good, bad, and ugly, which leads it to become the company it's in today with its roots.